Nelson said this. He said, once the snakes and dragons were out of his life, once he no longer had to send payments to any traditional banking institution, he said he was amazed at how fast he repaid his system.
Something you said reminds me of a conversation I had yesterday where I was meeting with a lady who lost her husband recently. And so she was kind of navigating everything. And one of the things that she said was, we have borrowed from the 401k over the years and repaid it and everything like that. And what I told her was, well, you're practicing the process already. You just need a better environment to practice that process in.
But Nelson says this, and we'll end with this. It says, money won't buy happiness, but poor stewardship of money will steal happiness. Money won't buy happiness, but poor stewardship of money will steal happiness.
Welcome to the Cashflow Legendz podcast with your hosts Nate, Brandon, and Brock. Remember, our insights are not direct financial advice, so consult with your financial team before making any decisions based on the topics discussed in this show.
Welcome back to Cashflow Legendz. If you are listening to us for the first time, first and foremost, we are so excited that you are sharing your time with us. That is something that is Nate and I and Brock, when he's on here, have journeyed into the world of being in control of our time as well as we can be. Time is our most valuable asset that we really have no control over other than that second at a time. So if you're new, thank you for joining. Please leave a question, a comment, a thought process. And if you are one of the OGs that's been with us from the beginning, then we are very grateful for you as well, because we know you share this and you pass it on to other people and you talk about it and you actually send us messages often saying, hey, I really enjoyed that conversation that y'all had. So Nate, today we're going to be talking about point in becoming your own banker, where Nelson calls it an even distribution of age classes. Now, I remember the first time I read Becoming Your Own Banker, and I want to put a thought to that. Reading Becoming Your Own Banker is not a one-time read. It's like going back to a workbook over and over and over again and hitting key points based off of where you are in your journey and your thinking and your mindset and your IBC system. But I remember the first time that I read that, Nate, I don't think I had a clue what it was talking about. What about you?
It was kind of difficult to comprehend at first, because what the point that Nelson's trying to make in this section is, what would it look like to build a financial system that serves not just my life, not just your life, but multiple generations after me. And we are so focused. Oftentimes we're so focused on just trying to put food on the table and, hoping that we've got something to live on when we're not creating income and all that stuff, that it's so difficult for so many people to look beyond that and what that really looks like. And I think Nelson does a great job of helping people kind of wrap their mind around what that would look like and what value that could bring to not only your generation, but future generations.
Good, Nate. So our key focus today for anybody listening is we're going to go, what does it really mean, even distribution of age classes? We're going to keep it at a level that I think I could have understood if I read it in the book, but just seen it on a simple one-pager. Why that matters and why most people completely miss this idea, Nate. I know I did the first time. And the crazy part is once we understand it, it's really simple. It's not complicated. All right. So the goal for Nelson was to solve the problem about what is really going on with money first. And the simple high level, Nate, I'm going to let you say it because you always remember it better than me, is we are always financing the things of life. And what does that really mean?
Yep. Yeah. One of the key principles in understanding how to become your own banker is this reality that we finance everything in our life, whether we're paying cash for it or not. And that's really twofold. So on one hand, we're always giving up interest. So when we're paying interest to the bank, obviously we're giving up interest in that scenario. But even when we are saving up and paying cash, we're giving up the interest that money could have earned if it would have been in a better environment. The other side of that is we're always making payments to someone. So when we're borrowing from the bank, we're making payments to the bank. When we are saving up and paying cash, we're making payments to ourselves for a future purchase. So money has to flow somewhere no matter what. And ideally, you would want it to flow through into the best environment possible.
And it's not surprising because we get the privilege of having this conversation all the time, that we just don't know as a society typically that there are environmental choices that are different. So what do I mean by that? Almost everybody does banking and the flow of money through environments that either banks control or credit card companies or some type of borrowing cycle that's going back to the bank. Even if you are like more, a more in-depth portfolio and you've got money in the market for different things, or you maybe have an account in the market and you borrow against that, you're still going through Charles Schwab, Edward Jones, Morgan Stanley. You're still going through their environment. So what Nelson said often is what we once we know what the problem is, the solution becomes clear or simple.
Well, something you said reminds me of a conversation I had yesterday where I was meeting with a lady who had lost her husband recently. And so she was kind of navigating everything. And one of the things that she said was, we have borrowed from the 401k over the years and repaid it and everything like that. Um, and what I told her was, well, you're practicing the process already. You just need a better environment to practice that process in. And once I explained the differences, because when you're borrowing, first off, you're limited to how much you can borrow from your 401k to begin with. But when you do borrow from it, you borrow from it, not against it. So that money is actually removed from the market, which means it interrupts your entire trajectory of your account at that point. You interrupt compounding, so to speak, if there was compounding that was taking place. Um, you don't get to control how it gets repaid.
Comes out of your
And
paycheck automatically, right?
what's that?
On a repayment
Yeah,
schedule. It
yeah,
comes out of your
exactly.
paycheck.
There is volatility with that account that's taking place when you're borrowing that money. So there's a
Yep.
possibility by the time you repay it, it could be worth less than when you originally took it out. And then on top of all of that, when you are repaying that, you are repaying it with after tax dollars. So you're getting a double hit on it when you're repaying it.
Now, Nate, the number of times we've heard someone say, "Oh, I've done something like that with my 401k over the last 8 years," and all the studying we've done and listening to other people who've done this for 20, 30 years is very, very common. And one of the best simplistic examples we can do to help you think through that. So if you're listening now and you borrowed against, not against, if you borrowed from your 401k before, is put side by side on a piece of paper what would be the difference between borrowing from your 401k and borrowing against your IBC system and a policy or a system of policies. And Nate, if you covered up at the top of the page what the products were and you showed a million people what each one gave you, whole life gets picked every time. So that proves that the problem is not the product, it's how we think.
Absolutely.
So let's few highlights here. Nelson was trained as a forester. Nelson says himself, he was trained to think long range. He was trained to think in generations beyond his.
Yep.
Because if you're trained as a forester, you're trained as a forester, you are always thinking about the next generation because you know when you harvest trees, there's a system and a process. So here's the first thing, Nate. Why don't farmers plant all their crops on the same day? This will reverse engineer into this same thought process.
Well, I mean, it goes back to this idea of an even distribution. So the point that Nelson wants people to understand is when the system is fully established, the crops or the forest becomes productive in steady and ongoing and predictable ways. So while one part is being planted, there's another part that's growing, and then there's another part that's being thinned out and improved, and then there's another part that's ready for harvest.
There you go. There you go. So let's zoom out even more. One of my favorite lines in Becoming Your Own Banker. It's where, because of our dear friend Richard Canfield, we send most people to go to page 85 of this book first, Becoming Your Own Banker. And there's a line in here. So everybody listening, if this is your first time, I want you to hear these words and tell me what you would think. If it's your second, 10th, 20th time to hear this, see how it hits you differently today than it did maybe the first time you said it. Point number 3, when we get paid for our work, we put all of our money into someone else's bank and then write checks. Nobody writes checks anymore, but bill pays. Bill pays or pays for from that account to buy the things of life. So someone else's bank gets all of our money. So Nate, if you had your own banking system, the Dean Bank or the Bank of Dean, and I had my own banking system, the Goswick Bank or the Bank of Goswick. Nate, when you got paid for doing the things you do exceptionally well, would you ever walk across the street to my bank and put money in my bank if you had your own bank?
I would not. I love you,
Mm,
but no, I would not.
love you too. But no, I would not either. What if you didn't have enough room in your bank? Then what would you do?
I'd have to break ground on another bank.
Uh, oh, you wouldn't just come over and give me the rest of it just because you love me that much?
No, no.
Mm, okay.
I would enjoy my precious capital and
Okay.
want to be able to store more of it.
Let all of that resonate. Anybody listening or watching, when you hear us say premiums are the solution, and you wouldn't want to deposit money into someone else's bank first, the only way we can create an environment over long range thinking and not being afraid to capitalize our system is by even distribution of age classes. And even doesn't mean exactly, Nate. Let me point to that. When you and I started personally, we both started with one policy each, one policy that we could wrap our mind around, our thought process around, our cash flow around. It was strategically built to fit us at that time. Fast forward to today. Now, this is the entire Goswick, Dean, Enix banking system. Okay. My parents, your parents, aunts, and uncles. There are 42 policies in our banking system. Now, Nate, do all those banking systems have to share with each other?
No,
No. So you have your own bank or banks, policies inside a banking system. I have mine. My parents have theirs. Your parents have theirs. My brother and sister in law have theirs. Your brother and sister in law have theirs. Leah's brother has his. But can they work together, Nate?
they definitely can.
Okay. So this is not anything crazy or outrageous. This is taking what's already being done to us that we don't know any better and taking over that process. And Nate, does it happen in one day?
No, it definitely doesn't.
Does it happen in 1 year?
It does not happen in 1 year.
No.
Um,
What was Nelson's number one principle?
think long term. And one of the things that Nelson talked about in different interviews is the reason why he showed people capitalizing their policies for 4 or 5 years. And he said, ideally, he said, I'd want somebody to capitalize their policy for 10 years before they started borrowing from it.
Mm,
Um, because
borrowing against
yeah, borrowing against it.
it.
Yeah, yeah, good catch. So
Thanks.
he said the reason for that is because by that time you have proven to yourself that you have overcome those human behaviors that we all fight against.
What are some of those human behaviors, Nathan, Nelson talks about at a high level?
Parkinson's law is the first one that comes to mind, and there's sort of three aspects of Parkinson's law. The one that people are most familiar with is expenses rise to equal income.
Mm,
Lifestyle creep is another way to say that. Another aspect is expenses, a luxury once enjoyed becomes a necessity. So we get a new feature on our vehicle and we get used to having that feature. And then the next time we get another vehicle, it's like, oh, that's got to be standard option now.
Got to have those heated and cooled seats now.
Stuff like that. Yeah. And then
Yep.
the third aspect of Parkinson's law is a work expands to meet the time envelope allowed. So if you get a 30-day deadline to get something done, most people are getting it done on day 30 or very close to that. If you're given 3 days to get something done, getting it done on day 3, kind of thing. And so that right there is probably the biggest human behavior that we have to overcome in order to win. Is just all
Yep.
aspects of Parkinson's law.
When you think about that on the even distribution of age classes, when I heard it say that it was ridiculously simple once we know what the problem is, 8 years ago, straight over my head, if you're watching on YouTube, if you're not, I just, did that visual. But now, one simple way to describe it is when you think of it like a forester, like Nelson was teaching, you want to have your system be able to meet different generations in a way. So this is how Nelson describes it. We've been listening a lot to Nelson, which highly recommend everybody go to the Nelson Nash Institute YouTube channel and just hit play on Nelson's playlist. And he said, at the peak of their system, their IBC system. They had 49 policies, I believe. And when he's being interviewed at this point, he said they were down to like 24, 5, 6, 7. So two key things here, Nate, I want you to touch on at a simple level. One, he says it took him 13 years to get rid of the snakes and dragons. So he makes the point on page 85 for the average person, it'll take 20 years. So that's a key indicator right there. If you can't think 30 days out in advance and know you're going to grow and learn and rethink your thinking, this isn't for you. But if you're thinking what I've been doing hasn't been working, then this is definitely for you, or it's not been working as good as it could. So he talks about that, Nate, but then he also talks about this idea that we're always preparing for when the next season of life happens, not if. So touch on those two things and why his policy number had gone down by the time that interview occurred.
So, this is not about a product first mentality. It's about creating a banking system. It's about creating a process. And like if we were just going to simplify it, the way Nelson kind of talks about this is grandparents begin the process by purchasing policies on the grandchildren. And then the next generation kind of follows that pattern. And over time, the family creates what would be sort of the financial equivalent of the forest. So where you've got different people, you've got different policies, different stages of maturity, all working together inside of one larger system. And so instead of every generation starting over financially, every generation now starts with structure in place. And thinking about something that Lee said one time, which is Nelson's granddaughter, this is all I've ever known. I've never known what it's like to go to a bank traditionally. And, what a gift that was that Nelson was able to establish for those future generations. And it's one of the things that I get excited about is as my kids get older, obviously they're going to be using the family bank. But if we do it right, then those grandkids are going to be using the family bank too.
And there's a key point there that I think we can touch on related to even distribution of age classes. IBC is caught more than taught. So key piece for anybody that's a first-time listener or new to this. We are not saying you can get rid of traditional banks. They are in the middle of how money flows. But what we are saying is you can use the banks for your banking system, for your control, for your certainty, for your peace of mind, or you can continue to be used by them because, make no mistake, they know the value of your dollar being deposited in their banking systems. And when we say systems, banks, Wall Street, IRS are places money can go.
Yeah, this came up in two conversations yesterday where I was talking to people who had grandkids, two separate conversations, and both it sparked a question that we've asked in some of our Pizza and Perspective workshops is, what would it be like for you if you knew that all the money you spent in your adult life was going to be returned back to you one day? And man, when people hear that, they're like, man, that would be amazing. Like they start thinking about all the cars they spent, the houses they bought, and all this other stuff. Well, the reality is we haven't been doing this long enough because our parents haven't been doing it long enough, in order to accomplish that. In most cases, like people who are brand new to this, obviously our parents are practicing IBC, so we are going to get to experience that at some level. So, but for most people, that's a brand new idea. Well, they're not going to get to experience that, but what a gift it would be for them to be able to create that opportunity for future generations to be able to get those refunds back on all the money that's going out the door. Because without any sort of system in place, every payment and interest is going to Chase, Wells Fargo, Capital One, Bank of America, you name it. Most people don't realize how much wealth actually leaves their life through the financing function, through the banking function. So car payments, mortgage payments, every loan, they service through someone else's system. What we've effectively done is just normalize the idea of giving away control. And then we wonder why, even with a decent amount of income, we wonder why we're still so far behind.
Yeah. Yeah, Nate, that's a really, really good point. I like the word normalize. Just because it's normalized doesn't mean it's best for you. We can take that thought process anywhere in our life. Just because it's normal doesn't mean it's best for us. it might just be a smidge easier because we don't have to rethink our thinking or get uncomfortable in how we think about it or put ourselves out there to learn something new. And one thing that I've taken away from re-listening to Nelson talk a lot lately is this is about imagination once we know what the problem is. So the other day I was visiting with somebody who they've done they've done the ongoing investment in themselves to become your own banker, rethink their thinking, but they're still early. They're in the first year. But they key things. I said, "What does this solve in your mind?" Because I was listening for some key points, and they sent an audio text, Nate, which you know I love because I can hear voice inflection and tone and excitement or frustration. And they basically said somebody else is controlling how the money's flowed through our life, and no matter what we do, we feel like we end up back at the same point. And therefore, there has to be a different option that's worth trying because this is not allowing us to get progress locked in consistently or progressively in a way that doesn't go back over time. I'm like, congratulations, you already have a better understanding of the problem than most. Now you have to come to grips with what is really the solution. And it's not going to be what mainstream tells you.
Yeah,
And so,
and I think the solution really becomes what gives me the most peace of mind and what gives me the most options with
mm,
levels of control going with each one of those.
yeah. Yeah, and Nate, one of the pieces so if we've got any grandparents listening, as there's one line in here, as each generation becomes grandparents, they buy life insurance on their grandchildren. You just said that, okay? But the even distribution of age classes, Nelson's talking about trees just to make a connection, okay? But he said it's far more profitable and certain as to the results when we do this for banking and thinking long range because there's no forest fires, no plant diseases, no storms, no property taxes. You have created perpetual motion in your family's financial world. And a lot of times, I haven't heard this in a while, Nate, but I heard him say it, so it's a good reminder. He talks about your own fishbowl or aquarium. I don't remember how he words it exactly, where all the water or the flow of money is flowing back into your family aquarium. So I'm going to push back on something we hear often, Nate, early on until about that third or fourth year, a lot of times in paying premiums, is the aha moment of the blessing it is to bring the opportunity to take over the banking function in your family's life to where you almost can't deny how much more valuable it is compared to any other option. Like you just can't wrap your brain around it till you've lived it for a while. So like Lee, like you said earlier, she knows nothing different. Like it's very likely that our grandkids, Nate, will not ever have to go through traditional lending.
Yep.
No filling out a file or a form, no turning in debt versus income ratios, no confidential financial statements for that. It's all going to be through the family banking system,
And
which is just a system of whole life policies.
what I lean into so much about what Nelson, because the people the argument that people make often is, oh, but I could go get a higher rate of return somewhere else doing this or that or whatever. I know this is going to sound weird, but just forget about rate of return for a second. When Nelson says it's such a peaceful way of living when you get the snakes and dragons out of your life, I'm more interested in peace than I am about a greater rate of return that also comes with volatility and uncertainty and all that other stuff. Um, because the highest rate of return that we can get with the highest amount of certainty is going to be becoming the banker for ourselves and for our family.
It's good. Now, we haven't said this in a while, and you alluded to it earlier. The simplicity of this is really this example that I like to do a lot of times. It's taking the process of banking I have in my right hand and the product of whole life and recognizing that those two combined with long range thinking and not being afraid to capitalize and being willing to be good stewards of our system and rethink our thinking and think long range as far as having a place for windfalls upon death is what this really is. It is a process. So if anybody says, "Oh, I have a policy," they haven't fully realized that this is about a system. So you can just go back to Nate would never walk across the street and deposit money in my bank if we both had banks. Yet we do this daily at banks in our neighborhood or in our city or in our town or online. So Nate, just for simplicity's sake, Nate and I get paid and it goes into a traditional bank. We cannot get around that. But what we do with it from there is where controlling the banking function begins to start and take over. And Nate, I was encouraged listening to Nelson earlier this week and last about how he said it took 13 years to get rid of the snakes and dragons.
Yeah.
Well, we're 8 years in, and I can tell
We're
you
over
without
halfway
a doubt,
there.
we're halfway there. I can tell you without a doubt, the peace
I
of
can
mind that comes
I
along
can
with
see it.
controlling more of it, of the function of banking, how money flows,
Yep.
is way more peaceful than going and getting a rate of return.
Yeah, it was hard to see at first,
It
but
was.
we're starting to see the glimpses of light at the end of the tunnel as we get closer and closer to that. But one of the things that you and I have constant conversations around is like anytime we've got anything over and above what we would consider left over, so to speak, we're always like, hey, what premiums can we put this in? What PUAs buckets can we fill? Whatever. That's always the first thing that we're thinking about now is where can we pay premiums to make sure that we maximize benefits and guarantees on these dollars.
Nate. Nelson said we need to be in two businesses. The one we love, so you should love what you do where your feet are, and banking. And we better understand banking. Nate, why is that such a vital statement that scares people away often?
Because banking sounds complicated, but it's actually really simple. And I mean, I just had this conversation yesterday. Someone is always going to be controlling the banking function in your life. And it's going to be you or it's going to be someone else. And when it's someone else, that means they're also capturing what might be your opportunity cost on your money. And so when you control the banking function in your life, opportunity cost is the hidden cost of everything that we do. And it's not necessarily something that shows up on our balance sheet or our budget. But when we have a system where we are recapturing, recovering opportunity costs, it's amazing how we start scooping up dollars that we didn't even know were leaving.
Yeah, Nelson said this. He said once the snakes and dragons were out of his life, once he no longer had to send payments to any traditional banking institution, he said he was amazed at how fast he repaid his system. Now, if you've read Becoming Your Own Banker, Nelson talks about headwinds and tailwinds, and he does a great job of really helping you understand as a pilot how advantageous it is to have a tailwind behind you pushing you and how ground speed like doubles, triples, or quadruples. But the great reminder here is, Nate, is that the majority of Americans, everybody listening right now, is doing the headwind thing. And so he says this, he says 34.5% of every dollar you have come into your life is leaving you with no control for you. And he said, I've been challenged on this multiple times. And he says, I'll just say, go back and do your own calculating. Go back and see how much is going to taxes, interest, inflation, lack of control. And he said, Nate, he said, only the way Nelson can, I'm paraphrasing. He said, they always come back and say, I was rather gracious on the number. It's actually higher. And he
Yeah.
goes, I like to do nice things to people like that.
Yeah.
So 34.5% was conservative.
Well,
Said another way, Nate, 34.5% of every dollar you earn goes somewhere and you have a chance to start taking that over. Go ahead.
yeah. Well, I was just going to go back to when you said that was conservative. Nelson wrote the book in the most conservative way that he could because he wanted to show somebody that even in the most conservative aspects of the numbers and everything like that, that it would still work. Um, he even to appease people who might want to argue with him on the equipment finance example. He even showed how he wasn't even taking policy loans in that example. He was just withdrawing the cash, the dividends or whatever, um, and which is a normal function. So if somebody wanted to argue about, oh, but you had to take a loan or whatever, well, we know how powerful a policy loan can be because it keeps pressure on those dollars to grow. But he was just showing taking the money, withdrawing the cash from the policy, and how it would still work in that example.
Yeah, Nate, because Nelson, when he wrote Becoming Your Own Banker, like you just alluded to perfectly, knew that people had a real hard time with these two words, loan and premium. And so I tell people often now when we meet, I actually said it a couple times this week, let's first establish what the word premium means to you currently and what the word loan means to you currently. Write it down. And it almost always means a cost or money leaving that I don't get back or something I hope that never happens. But I have to do it. Forced control being taken away. So one of the biggest shifts here is that you will begin to understand that premium is a privilege that not everybody has, and you want it as long as you can possibly have it to have a system to expand and control the banking function. And a loan is a blessing that you will control to create more value in your life. They're unlike anywhere else in the world where you hear premium and loan when it comes to being the banker. So I was talking to a very successful business owner this morning, and I probably got his wheels to turning because he says, I don't understand the question. I said, how much of the banking function do you currently control in your business? And he said, I am the bank. I said, awesome. I said, are you the bank in this model? Money in the bank, cash, pays for living, investments, expenses, all the thing you're paying for, money gone forever into somebody else's bank. He's yet to respond because that's not what we mean by being the bank. That is not being the bank. That means you're housing your wealth in somebody else's environment and they are getting the benefits of the deposit. And when that money leaves that environment, it's gone. We'll never recreate more value down the road. And so, Nate, for everybody listening, if you had one takeaway at a high, simple level that you would want them to be sure they grasp, what would you say?
I think just a powerful question would be, what am I normalizing financially in my life right now for my family?
That's good. I'll piggyback on that. Whatever I am normalizing in my life financially, what would it look like if that began to change? And what action step would I need to take first to see what those changes could do for my family? Because, Nate, everybody that we work with that becomes a client is really becomes a friend. They want freedom of time. But Nelson says this, and we'll end with this. It says, money won't buy happiness, but poor stewardship of money will steal happiness.
Hmm.
Money won't buy happiness, but poor stewardship of money will steal happiness. Where is happiness being stolen? And what do you have in your life that you need to rethink you're thinking about to potentially gain peace of mind? Nate, what a cool thing that we get to hit record and talk about things that we would talk about anyway without hitting record. We hope it brings value to everybody listening, watching, following up later. Please reach out to us if you have any questions about how this could be implemented in your life. Nate has a free open calendar that is always available to anybody that's like, hey, I think I could utilize some more knowledge in this area. And Nate, you don't ever get on and go, you have to spend this much money in this first call. It's always an exploration of where are they with their thinking? What do they currently know? What are action steps that they feel would bring the most value to them for the next step? Because as we think in our company and Brock's company, we think long range. We're not thinking about selling you a policy today. We're thinking about how are you thinking about that future generation, the next generation? How are you going to work backwards from that to do what you're already doing more efficiently? So we appreciate everybody's time, energy, and willingness to listen and learn. And we look forward to doing this again with you the next time. Have a blessed evening.